Mathematics has been called the one universal language of mankind. It is perhaps our most powerful tool for problem solving. And in terms of subject matter, pure mathematics and logic are one and the same. The subject matter consists in the relations generally expressed by if, then necessarily. Computers have been called machines for logic. The human problem solver must first define the problem. He must also provide the machine with instructions as to the steps necessary to solve the problem. And then the machine will carry out these instructions accurately and with fantastic speed. All of this, of course, requires very precise logical thinking on the part of the problem solver. It is the machine's power to carry out these logical operations that gives it its great value as a tool for extending man's thought. Logic is not the science of how we think. Thinking involves much more than logic. It is essential to logic and mathematics that, given a set of premises, the conclusion will follow in all cases. Results from a computer are the necessary conclusions arising from the data and rules of operation provided the machine by the human programmer. And yet, these conclusions can accurately reflect and foretell real-life situations. What is the nature of this remarkable correspondence between the abstract symbols of mathematics and logic and the real perceptible world of objects and events? We ask Professor Nagel to comment on this.
Well, I would like to say something about that, because this has been, I suppose, for many, many centuries, a problem that has occupied men, and because of the apparent agreement of what we might call reality or nature with the language that we employ, whether it is ordinary English or whether it is the language of mathematics, the apparent agreement between reality and the symbolic representation, men have speculated about, sometimes about the origin of the world, something about the necessity of there being some particular kind of creative agency. And so, if one asks, why is it that the consequences of assumptions that we make are in agreement with nature, the answer is because nothing can count as an instance of the assumptions that we make unless the assumptions themselves are confirmed.
The electronic computer in the service of the human problem solver reflects back to him the consequences of the assumptions he employs when he builds a mathematical model of a real-life situation.
So that rather than saying, as for example, the late Sir James Jeans maintained, that the fact that mathematics is used in exploring nature, he maintained that this shows that there must have been a divine creator, and moreover that the creator was a mathematician. In terms of this simpler reminder of the sorts of things that enter into applying any formal system to any segment of nature, one would have to say the reason why nature conforms to our assumptions is not that there was a mathematician who created it, but simply that nothing would count as an instance of the assumptions unless it also conformed to whatever consequence was deduced from it.
The problem-solving power of mathematics and logic, combined with the speed and accuracy of a machine for carrying out these operations, is the basis of the computer revolution. But does this mean that a computer can produce a new idea or make an original contribution to knowledge? We ask this question of both Professor Nagel and Dr. Hamming.
It depends entirely upon what you mean by a new idea. In some senses, the machine only produces what you expect. On the other hand, you do not foresee all combinations, and the machine often produces combinations which you had not foreseen and have the impression of novelty.
Well, the question as to whether machines or computers are capable of original thought or of making original contributions to knowledge is a very much debated one, but before one can profitably discuss it, it seems to me it's very important to distinguish between two senses in which a statement or an idea might be said to be original. The two senses are a psychological sense of originality and a logical sense of originality. And I think perhaps the best way of making the distinction clear is first with an illustration. When a child is given an elementary arithmetical problem, for example, to find the sum of two numbers, when he gets the answer, the conclusion is something that is novel or new to him. So psychologically, of course, he gets the sense of having made a discovery. Nevertheless, the answer is something that is necessarily or logically implied in the premises or the assumptions, and the process of thought here simply is to unravel or make explicit what was already contained in a logical sense in the premises. I think I'd risk going out on a limb here and say that it seems to me that, at least on the basis of our present conceptions of the capacities of computers as well as the actual ones that have been constructed, that computers do not come up with logically new ideas, and unless the nature of the beast changes very radically, that they cannot come up with logically new ideas, given the assumptions that underlie the present theory of computers.
Many people are attempting to use computers to replace man. I am much more interested myself in using man and machines as a working combination. I believe that some of the future is already fairly clear. It is obvious that the machines can do routine, logical consequences much more rapidly and much more accurately than a human can. Therefore, I believe we will gradually push the detailed logical parts, the methods which we use, onto the machine, and we will reserve for ourselves the creation of new ideas and the direction of the research. Thus, the man-machine combination will find a dividing line passing gradually from man over to machine, the machine taking more and more of the burden as we learn how to use the machines and as the machines become more powerful, and we will find ourselves left in the more creative aspects of the problem, deciding what it is worth attacking, what are the problems which we wish to solve. These kind of questions we do not know how to give the computer and seem best reserved for man at present.
I think we have to say that in this respect, the human mind is capable of doing things that none of the machines that are available today is capable of doing. This certainly doesn't foreclose the question whether sometime in the future machines might not be devised so that exactly this kind of a thing will be credited to machines. But at present, and this is all that one can say at the moment, there are clear lines of demarcation between the capacities of the human mind in respect to the capacity to make contributions to knowledge which is our original.
Dr. Hemming, will you give me some of your summary thoughts on this computer revolution?
Well, the word revolution is used very freely these days, and yet I think there's some meaning to the words, the computer revolution. We have got an increase in computers of 1,000,000-fold, decrease in costs by 1,000, as we said before. This is a very real change. But the question still arises, will this revolution continue? It seems to me, in view of the political situation in the whole world, that no responsible group can oppose the coming computer revolution. Therefore, it seems to me we have a real one which will continue. Now, I believe that the reports we hear of this revolution are very misleading. They often underestimate the speed which is going on and the importance. But worst of all, they tend to emphasize the material aspects, how much we will have of this and that, how much leisure, what wonderful new things we will have, and they fail to discuss the impact it will have on our view of ourselves and our world outlook. This, I believe, is the most important part of the computer revolution.
I do think that as a consequence of these increased complexities in society and the obviously greater degree of control that will have to be exercised if we are not going to run into each other constantly, it does require us to think seriously as to how in the future we, or perhaps more specifically our children and grandchildren, will be able to realize the potentialities that we would like our own society to enable us to develop. We shall have to find ways of training ourselves how to enjoy the leisure that we presumably are going to have, the greater leisure that we're going to have, in such a way that instead of being frustrating and making life a perpetual boredom, will enable us to engage in creative activities. This seems to me to be the central problem that faces Western civilization, insofar as the material goods of life are going to be increased, but it does raise a fundamental issue as to how what was sometimes called the spiritual aspect of life, or I would prefer to call it the creative aspect of individuality, will be given a room for development. Now, there's no simple answer to this question.
If there is any mystery in the computer revolution, let's be sure that the mystery is located in the right place. In spite of its magnetic memory, complex circuitry, and so on, the mystery is not in the machine. The sense of awe and mystery that we may experience when we see a computer in operation is really awe at the accumulated months and years of thinking by human problem solvers reflected back to us at fantastic speed. A computer scientist once remarked that we have machines that compute with the speed of light, but with the intelligence of the earthworm. While it is true that the computer can be called a kind of brain, although a very limited one, in order to solve any problem, the computer must first be instructed by a human programmer who has painstakingly and logically analyzed the problem. The computer is then given the problem in the form of numbers or instructions pertinent to arithmetic. It is the arithmetic logical task that the computer is organized to do. Once instructed, it can do as much arithmetic in a minute as a man in a lifetime. A man in a lifetime. The lifetime of all mankind is but a brief moment in the long history of this earth of ours, and only yesterday in the history of mankind has man made any significant advance in his control over his earthly environment. Computers, machines for logic, may change this more than any other of man's inventions. These machines, which have been with us less than a millionth of a second in terms of the temporal span of man's history, have already given promise of deep and far-reaching change in our way of life and way of thinking. They literally accelerate into milliseconds of time our ability to perform logical, arithmetic, and control tasks. But finally, the future, except in terms of trends and probabilities, is the great unknown, and the uses to which we put ourselves in relation to the marvelous machines of our own invention is perhaps the central moral and intellectual challenge of our own brief moment in time. This is NET, National Educational Television.